All right. Yeah. Thanks, Rob. That was amazing. Thanks to Oscar and Ryan for helping us make this happen. It's a real treat to be down here doing this today. Okay, so I'm going to read for just a couple of minutes so that I can be concise and get this thing kicked off in a good way. So, Rob, you stole a little bit of my thunder talking about Colorado River watershed, but nonetheless, John Wesley Powell, after his exploration of this river valley in the late 1800s, suggested we should form the western states based on watersheds. Think about that for a moment. A statehood shared by natural boundaries, defined by the movement of water as it reaches the earth. In that spirit, and in spite of the boundaries we live with, I like to think of all of us as citizens of the Colorado River watershed. This image of Lake Mead and its bathtub ring is a stark reminder of the contested nature of this overextended region. A landscape defined by the ridges of the vast basin, a place of immense and profound possibility for architectural influence. At Jones Studio, we find inspiration in these contradictions, adventure in the possibility of designing spaces of dignity, and reward in creating solutions of optimism, celebration, and repair. For tonight's talk, we have organized the work into 3 themes. First, clearly, the water of this great basin is a powerful and important influence, a rich wellspring of beauty, both natural and industrialized. And with this image, a stark reminder that we all can do better. Next, the geopolitical borders that cut and divide this watershed, and the importance of being dedicated to a search for optimism in the sometimes maddening complexities of contemporary society. The third and last section is based on our shared ethos of learning from the wisdom of those who have thrived here before us, how they listened and worked with the earth and were inspired by the genius of place.
Thanks, B.
Yep.
Well, contested landscapes, what does that mean? For me, it's discourse, right? It's competing and often contrasting discourse. And so, using examples throughout our history, one of the oldest examples I could cite is the Southwest United States. It was occupied by the Native Americans first, and Mexico decided they wanted it, and then we decided we wanted it. and the native tribes have coexisted somehow within that contentiousness. I was very fortunate to arrive in Arizona in 1973, early 20s, and I went to work for a company called Lesher Mahoney. It was the oldest architecture firm in Arizona. They had just been purchased by Dana Larson and Rubel, which you guys know today as DLR. But I was the first employee for DLR. And their specialty, beginning in Omaha, Nebraska, was working with the Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government, participating in what was called the Indian Housing Program, providing housing for the individual families of the individual tribes. So as a result, they bought me a Nikon camera and sent me out into the desert to all 4 quadrants of Arizona and every place in between to photograph indigenous architecture. You can imagine, here I am, I just arrived in Arizona and I'm getting the best education an architect could get, and I got paid for it at the same time. It also prepared me for around, Neil arrived in 1984. By 1985, he was able to convince the Arizona State Parks that we should be the architects on the new visitor center for the Hamalabi State Park. Has anybody ever heard of the state park called the Mullet? Good, there's two. This was to become the first building Jones Studio ever did that wasn't someone's house. And it overlooked the Hopi Reservation. The Hopi Reservation is in the middle of the Navajo Reservation. Talk about contested landscapes. And can you imagine, our first building that wasn't somebody's house is in this landscape. It is out in the middle of nowhere. That's why you've never seen it or even heard about it. And so, for me, it's like, well, doesn't everybody get a vast landscape to do their first building? I didn't know any better. I didn't know how lucky I was. But this building still exists. And I'm very proud to say it won the 25-year award, Arizona 25-year award at the last AIA Awards banquet. It's still serving the same purpose it did when it was first opened 35 years ago. 25-year award for a 35-year-old building.
Those are all fresh photos, brand new.
Yeah, one reason it never received any recognition is because Neil and I were out of money and we couldn't afford a photographer. So now we can afford one. And now this next project is a different kind of contested landscape, a different kind of historical reference. It's called the House of Five Dreams, and it has to compete with irrigation canals and roads and mostly suburbia in Paradise Valley. Programmatically, I knew it had to be a 30,000 square foot house. And so in the middle of suburbia. So I knew it was going to go underground just to reduce the scale. And this early idea sketch shows this kind of blossoming flower at a third point. Didn't know really why yet, but it ended up to come true. The Lynns, who own this house, have a priceless pre-Columbian art collection. And we needed 20,000 square feet to house it. So before I could go up, I had to go down. This pre-Columbian collection of artifacts was discovered below grade, therefore it needs to return below grade. This hole we dug is the length of a football field and it's 65 feet wide. And you can imagine the amount of dirt that came out of that hole. And so we had plenty of material to build rammed earth retaining walls. They're 4 feet thick. It's a wonderful, solid, very protected space, in contrast to where they live in this sort of fabric-wrapped pod floating above everything. And, so the contrast between the solidity and weight of the underground collection versus the sparkle of the upper level was achieved by this 75-foot long wall, 26 feet tall, stacked glass. Tens of thousands of pieces of quarter-inch glass stacked like bricks. As you can see on the left, we had to hire bicycle mechanics to build it because nobody wanted to touch it. And since today, we have this little flower, where there's a flower space in the original idea sketch and a flower space in reality. And the house is wrapped in fabric to mitigate heat gain, but it opens not unlike a flower when necessary. Now, instead of wrapping with fabric, this building's wrapped in a lattice work. Again, to give people a natural light, natural ventilation without the heat gain. We learned this from, just north of town here. You can recognize Santa Vera Mission, the Ramada. If you've lived here long enough, you know what that means. And the natives, had to survive in the desert, and they learned how to do that. And we just stole the idea and turned it vertically. But there are other influences that go into architecture, as you might imagine. The Japanese say that you can never fully appreciate a pattern until you interrupt it, which explains why there are interruptions on the street side of this building. So that brings us to the outpost. This is a house in Paradise Valley. The owner is a very unique individual. His name's Michael Lacey. He is the founding publisher of New Times alternative newspaper. And he hasn't owned it for a long time, but he did start that newspaper. And he came to Rick first, but then he came to me after Rick didn't return his calls, apparently. and he said to me, he didn't ask for living rooms and bedrooms and things like that. He said, Eddie, I want a house of mud and shadow. And he's a journalist, he's a writer, so of course he speaks in terms like that. And how do you say no to a request like that? Now, further north from Tucson is Pueblo Casa Grande National Monument, a house of mud and shadow. And so rammed earth seemed to be a natural for this, as one of the materials for this house. You know, rammed earth construction will last 1,000 years. Now, but that's not the whole story. This is a photograph of the Rose Pawson house. It was the first house Frank Lloyd Wright ever did in Arizona, and it sat on top of a hill overlooking the Biltmore Hotel. It was a beautiful piece of architecture. The first book I ever bought was an architecture book. I used my paper route money, and inside that book was this photograph of the two-story living space of the Pawson house. Now, Rose Pawson was a fabric designer, and you can see an example of her work in the curtains that are hanging there against the fireplace. 6 months after they moved in 1942, those curtains blew into the fireplace and burned the whole house down. But even in ruin, it was a powerful statement of architecture, one that influenced my entire career. The fact that Wright had you arrive at the bottom of the hill and ascend a set of stairs that practically melted into the desert was a profound thing for me. And so, with the outpost, I did the same thing. I forgot to tell you, inside that living room of the Pawson ruins, looking through that glass, you could see Lacey's site. And that was the connection. I had to recognize that connection, and I did it with the circulation here. The other material besides rammed earth that lasts 1,000 years is wood, which doesn't last one summer in Phoenix. Now, I'm not being irresponsible. I did that on purpose because I wanted nature to finish designing the house when she starts to dry the wood out and twist it and discolor it and snap it. In 2016, Jones Studio moved into our new building located in Tempe, Arizona. Do you see the little red rectangle there, sort of at a third point on the left? That's our site. You see Sun Devil Stadium on the right. And Tempe happens to sit at the divergence of the Salt River into the canal system that was built centuries ago. There's over 500 miles of canal, and it was all dug by hand. And Tempe sits right where it begins to branch out. And so that's where we put our building, and we've enjoyed the difference that it has made in the neighborhood. I've always called it the last ghetto in Tempe, but people are starting to invest in it and improve it. And Jones Studio tables are a big deal. They sort of symbolize collaboration. And so if you were to, and you're always invited, anybody's invited to come over and tour the studio, but we spend a lot of time sitting around our family table, enjoying one another's company as well as solving problems. We're up to 20 people now, all striving to have a life of excellence.
Did y'all take notice how many CAPLA employees there are in that photo? Okay, so this next group of work is really sort of focused around how water has influenced our work over the past bunch of years, and it really started with some of the early houses that Eddie did for me, learning from Judith Chafee, and then just really becoming inquisitive and wanting to know more and understand how we can celebrate this resource. If we go back to the Colorado River watershed as sort of that ideal state boundary, you can see clearly didn't manifest like that. We all know it didn't. There's 7 states that share that boundary, and this diagram sort of conveys the contested nature of dividing up water within states. And when the federal government gets involved and people fight for how much water they can get, you end up with these allotments. And this division of water, the lull of the river, the Colorado River Compact from the 20s, really sort of defines our lives in so many ways, so many that you really don't realize. But I think it's really important to think about that in terms of making architecture that reconnects everyone that gets to enjoy it and participate in it with this resource here. This first project I'm going to talk about is a theoretical project that we did for Lake Havasu City, which is, you can see this is the bottom of the watershed, and Lake Havasu is really the sort of the nexus for the Colorado River system, in that body of water has 2 straws stuck into it. One sucks water out into Central Phoenix and down to Tucson via the Central Arizona project. The other straw sucks water out and sends it into Los Angeles via the Colorado River aqueduct. So a large amount of the water that keeps our civilizations in Phoenix, in Arizona and California moving forward is dependent on that body of water that's really known for spring break, if anything. It's a remarkable landscape, just this sort of craggy, almost like Mars-scape, that has this incredible blue pond of water filling up the valley. And, first visit to the site, we came across this incredible geology. And this rock was one of many that had been sort of, it's almost as it had given up and given way to the forces of sun, water, and rain. And it really sort of, it ultimately sort of spoke to the influence of the way the diagram of the building came about, with these cracks that became the connections for sight lines and movement across the site. A sketch driving back from Lake Havasu to Phoenix on the right. And then sort of evolving this diagram, sort of, you can see the lines that connect those view corridors and those connections out to the water, but then also beginning to shape these spaces so that they can collect rainwater and focus them very sort of deliberately. And then the diagram of, or the floor plan and the site plan sort of overlaid on the site. A couple of elevations and a section at the bottom. The elevation at the top to the south is the section that opens up to the lake view. As you approach the visitor center on the north, it's a very sort of solid wall that you arrive at and then sort of crack, arrive through one of those cracks, one of those view corridors. A rendering of sort of that approach and getting to that sort of crotch of the building where you can move into the patio, to the open side and the connection to the water. And a view from above looking down on the facility. Another sort of study project, a dream project that really is inspired by water is what we call Rio Unido. It was a competition entry that we did a few years ago, and it was set where the Salt River crosses, where Central Avenue in Phoenix crosses the Salt River. And again, back to this tourney map that Eddie shared before, the Hohokam influence in the valley, in the Salt River Valley is really profound, and it's something that I think as we sort of grow and evolve and mature as a civilization in the desert, we have to turn back to this line and sort of reconnect and build back to it and give it the respect that it deserves. There's still moments all along it where life is sort of taking over, where water drains naturally into this dry riverbed, and it's powerful, and it's something that our future will be defined by. So an aerial, this aerial, you sort of get a sense of one of those spots. It's by Audubon, right where Central crosses Rio Salado. We envisioned this sort of civic space where the civilization of Phoenix could come together and meet at this important juncture in history of the place. And this is something that connects for me back to this idea of resilience. And this facility was designed with this idea of embracing not only when it's dry, not only when we have monsoon rains, but when we have floods as well. And really sort of transforming and becoming different and beautiful, and a wonderful place to be in all of those different conditions. And so a shady space gathering at the bottom of the river, at this waterway where you can put your feet in the water. And then also dreaming big, giving Phoenix its Space Needle, its London Eye, where you can get up above and see the landscape and reconnect and have that perspective on the valley. So obviously no money to make that happen, but if anybody knows anyone that wants to... A project, really, I like to call it my favorite project right now that I'm working on, is for the Central Arizona Project, and it's a water education center. And this facility, we did a concept design for, and then ultimately pursued the RFP and won the job, and now we're working on programming and early concept work. So this is a facility that is dedicated to telling the story of not only the history of water in Arizona and in the Phoenix Valley, but in the history of the Central Arizona Project, which is this absolutely remarkable engineering feat. 336 miles of canal that lifts water from Lake Havasu 1,200, 1,300 feet or so up and into the desert. And most people don't have any idea that it even exists and what it does. And it's really, truly a remarkable feat. It's back to that idea of celebrating not only the natural aspects of how we deal with water, but the industrialized aspects, the engineering marvels that we have that allow us to exist here. Spans the canal. It's meeting space. It's where all the water wonks of the West can come together and talk about how we make sure we have water into the future. And it's also an exhibit area where people can come and learn and interact with the story of the CAP and water in the West.
I often say this building had to span the canal. It was like a no-brainer. If anybody can give us permission to build a building spanning a canal, it's CAP, because it's their canal.
Yeah, the initial brief that we got discussed a viewing platform to look over at the canal. But as soon as I sat down and started sketching, it's such a no-brainer, right? Right? So we're excited to move this one forward and moving into schematic design here in the next month or so. The next project is one that many of you might know about. I'll just touch on it a little bit. Has anybody ever seen this photo of the parking lot? I know a few people that have been around for a while. This is what it looked like when I went to school here. And the premise of the expansion was to bring the landscape college into one building with the architecture college and the planning group. Landscape architecture used to be across the street, down the road a bit. And so, working with Christy Tenaik on this, very early on, this idea of creating this sort of symbiotic relationship that's expressive and representative of the two schools coming together and being able to learn from each other and thrive because of each other really sort of came about. So you capture all the rainwater that used to hit the parking lot and run to the sewer. And 8 years after, that's what the same view looked like. And then just this past semester, the same view, it gets better and better every time I visit.
Absolutely. Blows me away.
We have to get Christy back here to see it. So it's this idea of capturing roof water, capturing condensate, taking it into a tank, making it an integral piece of the architectural expression, making it deliberate, not something tacked on and added on, but something that's integral. And then having that water then feed the landscape, irrigate the garden so that it can grow up and then shade the building. Very much a symbiotic relationship between architecture and landscape architecture. Some of the diagramming that's looking at how much water we could get off the roof, the desert wetland, that initial idea. And for those of you that don't know how that stays wet all the time without using city water, there is a pump right outside the building here that brings up water from the aquifer. That's actually water ultimately from the CAP that replenishes the aquifer. And every 2 weeks or so, that pump, the screen on it gets gummed up, and there's about 200 gallons of water that cleans it out, flushes it out. We grabbed that 200 gallons of water and routed it over to the pond so that it always has some water in it and can get that recirculation going, even in the driest times. There's the tank going into the steel frame. Maria, watching. The section, the relationship with the studios, the connection to the distant landscape, and the immediate landscape of the garden on the south. Inside, outside, you guys know all this. And then it's good in a monsoon and it's good in a drought. An early rendering of what we hoped it might look like, and then a more recent shot of what it's really looking like today.
Thanks, Pete. So, little did we know that all these lessons in history and water research was about to prepare us for our most impactful work to date. And you talk about contentious landscapes. I think this is probably the mother of all contentious landscapes, at least in southern Arizona. And so we've been very fortunate to become frequently the architects doing land ports of entry. There's airports, seaports, and land ports. For us, this represents the gateway to the United States. And it's a privilege to work on the Arizona border. Now, you guys probably know the name Ron Riel and his wife Virginia. I think they've lectured here before. Wonderful people, wonderful couple. And maybe you're familiar with this teeter-totter project down on between El Paso and Juarez. So Ron and Virginia wanted to do something that was more about connectivity than it was separation. So they covertly built these pink seesaws, and then one afternoon hustled them out across the no man's land and inserted them into brackets and used the fence, the wall, so to speak, as the fulcrum. And then they stood back. Within minutes, the children from Juarez and the children from El Paso started to play. They didn't need any instructions. They knew intuitively that this, in order to be successful, this playground was dependent on weight and cooperation. And as long as they cooperated with one another, they were going to have fun. How simple is that? And then, after 45 minutes, they were done, and they went someplace else to play. Border Patrol standing around, scratching their heads. They don't know what to do. And then Ron and Virginia plucked the teeter-totters out and took them back to the shop. That's comical, right? It's fun and entertaining to talk about, but I also find it very profound. You know, if you have compassion for your fellow human beings, then you're going to maybe appreciate that sign on the left there. But if you're one of the people that thinks that lacks empathy for desperate families, then you're going to like Trump's failed wall contest. Before we started Mariposa Land Port of Entry, we took a very important educational trip across the border into Nogales, connected up with a local organization that could teach us the reality of living on that side of the wall. And in combination with that, Arizona's poet laureate, Alberto Rios, who grew up in Nogales, Arizona, was asked to write a poem by Governor Janet Napolitano back in 2003 to commemorate Vicente Fox, who was the president of Mexico when he came to visit Arizona. It's a beautiful poem. I won't read the whole thing, but it's about looking at a map at a butcher shop and seeing all the lines, that show where to cut, the different pieces of meat out. But what's really important is that last sentence in the poem, which I will read to you. Together, let's turn the map until we see clearly. The border is what joins us, not what separates us. That affects one's attitude. To look at these imaginary lines and see them as a point of connection as opposed to a point of separation will make all the difference in how you approach the design of a gateway to America. First of all, if you think it's a separator, you're not even going to call it a gateway to America. Now, the location of the Mariposa Land Port is 5 miles west of downtown Nogales. If you've ever gone into Nogales, Sonora, you probably crossed in the DeConcini Port in a very dense, congested part of downtown Nogales. Because the Mariposa Port is a commercial port with tens of thousands of semi-trucks coming up from as far away as South America, Central America, as well as Mexico, bringing mostly produce across the border. This particular commercial port has become very, very busy, especially since the NAFTA treaty was signed, making it even easier for us to do trade with Mexico. This was what we found in 2006. It was built in the early 70s. It had outlived its usefulness. It was unable to keep up with the security protocols, as well as it had a lack of capacity to handle all the trucking. Now, why is that important? Well, if you have a truck full of tomatoes sitting in traffic for 10 hours waiting to be inspected, then people lose money, and you can't lose money when it comes to business. So we were able to transform this land port, and it's an amazing story. I mean, here we are, Jones Studio. Gosh, we all the money's gone out of the checkbook in 2006, and we're down to 6 employees. And then we get this job in 2008, which, if you remember, was when the recession hit. So Jones Studio had the largest construction job in Arizona. amazing. And it nearly killed us, but we managed to grow up and learn a lot about not only cross-border relationships, but also about cross-border commerce. During the process, we were very, as anybody who lives in the Sonoran Desert, you can't help but fall in love with the colors, the natural colors of the region. So we thought, well, this is a great idea. We're going to use those colors of the desert to emphasize the canopy, emphasize the threshold, emphasize the gateway to the United States. And Customs and Border Protection, who occupy the building, General Services Administration is a federal arm of the government. They own the building. Customs and Border Protection uses the building, and they said it looks too Mexican. So on the way back to Phoenix that day, we challenged ourselves. Okay, we know what they want. We know they want red, white, and blue. How can we exploit that? How can we find an opportunity with that? Well, Brian brilliantly realized that there are way more colors in the American flag than 3. And he created this spectrum that became a wayfinding device. The private vehicles know to go to the left towards the red, the pedestrians go towards the white, and then the commercial trucks go towards the spectrum of blue. Alexis, hi, I just saw you. And that's what we built, 54 acres. And you saw the aerial of the before shot. It's a desolate landscape, very arid, very, very little rainwater. And we built a garden. And a garden and an architecture that respects people, welcomes them to America. It represents the dignity of our government, and it's been very successful. But so you might ask yourselves, how can you put a 54-acre garden in an arid region that can barely support the population of Nogales, Arizona? Well, Brian's going to get into that in a little bit, but this is the pathway, into the United States. So it went from this to this. You can see the silly wall in the foreground there, but this isn't Photoshop. This building really looks like this, and we're very proud of it.
Yeah, Bill Timmerman nailed that photo. But this idea of connection and breaking down the border, of finding a sincere gesture of welcome to America in a very exceptionally contentious project and location. We had belief in the power of architecture, but also belief in the power of a garden. And how do you support a garden in Nogales? You build a giant rainwater harvesting tank, and you grab pretty much all the rain that falls on the site. We were working with GSA on this project, and the relationship has evolved in many ways. But the delivery method has evolved as well. That was a design, bid, build project, and now we're doing design, build projects. So this project, we were able to go for a lot of things and slip a lot of stuff sort of in without really sort of raising any radar or alerting anybody that we were going too far. And it bid so far under budget in that climate that we were able to get it all, and ultimately, the government gave GSA gave $20 million back, and then built the courthouse in Yuma with that $20 million that we had left over. Stephen Ehrlich, yeah.
Is the architect.
So anyway, so we're not just collecting rainwater, we're shaping all of the buildings to express that collection of rainwater also. So section, you can see sort of this oasis zone that we call it running down the center. It's a safe zone. These projects have to do all the things that Eddie's talked about. They also have to be bulletproof. They have to provide spaces for the officers to be able to let their guard down and relax. And we really tuned into that. So we not only have a garden that greets travelers, but we have a garden that allows all of the officers and the staff that work there to take a moment and breathe and not be on. And we really feel like that gesture pays down to their interactions with the people that they're tense situations that they're working with each day. So the garden, I think, has this sort of broad spectrum of delivery. You can see an aerial under construction of the canopy stretching across roughly about 1,000 feet across, and the rainwater tank going in. It's basically this system of void forms. There's a liner, stone, void form, more stone, and then you basically drain all the water to that spot, and it filters down in and fills up the tank.
1 million gallons.
Yeah. Yeah, and so spaces like this, where you can see, this place of respite, where a little bit of that water is being pumped up as a fountain element, really a way to keep the tank water clean and aerated, and to contribute a little bit of sound to this outdoor gathering space. And then this is under that, where that canopy is stretching across and beginning to dissipate. And again, embracing, that monsoon condition as well. So the pedestrian experience at Mariposa when we arrived, this was us returning from our Border Links trip, taking a photo. Really no definition of where people should walk versus cars. And then 8 years later, arriving into a garden with a wayfinding element, and just a really strong gesture, despite all the noise of Welcome to America. The next land port of entry we got was south of Yuma in San Luis, and it was a small 8,000 square foot building dedicated to making the pedestrian experience move faster. It was an existing land port of entry, and we did this small addition, thinking about the future of how the port might ultimately be completely reworked. So this is the southwest corner of Arizona, the spot where the Colorado River turns from water into lettuce. And it's just a remarkable area, very much self-evident of what's happening there. You can see the location of the port. And I think the other thing to take note of is sort of the pressure of San Luis, Rio, Colorado, up against San Luis, Arizona, and all of those people that live there and thrive there and come across this crossing sometimes during the harvest season every day to work in the lettuce fields and then go back home. So this project was really dedicated to creating a human experience for those folks that sometimes line up 2 a.m, wait many hours to get across and work, as you see here in this photo. So this is the existing land port of entry before we started, and then sort of the diagram of the little pedestrian building that we added. Very much a tack on, very much anticipating the ultimate rework of the rest of the site. So the pedestrian path through the architecture was influenced by these fields of lettuce. Very literally, very straightforward, taking that sawtooth pattern of the lettuce fields of the furrows and turning it on its side and extruding it into a building, thinking that that movement that the water takes through the furrows could be an element that would move people through, but replacing the water with light and skylights along the tops of the sawtooth. So that extrusion in reality after the building was finished. The yellow is a design element that actually started from Mariposa when we finished. There was no yellow in our color palette when we were working on the project. When we'd go back to visit, it seemed like every time we went back to visit, there was something new painted safety yellow, some curb, some bollard, something. Just like, what are these people doing? So for this project, we decided we were going to embrace that reality and use that as an element, as a wayfinding element, as a spot for people to know where to go. So safety yellow became sort of an entry marker. It became those processing booths that you saw moving through the building, and then from the outside at the end of the project.
Heading further west, you find the Otay Mesa Land Port of Entry. You know, we're kind of on a roll. Have you noticed? I mean, we just keep getting these amazing opportunities to work on gateways, and I think, and I'm not over exaggerating this. The reason GSA trusts Jones Studios so much is because our attitude is about connecting our two countries together. And it influences our work, literally and measurably influences our work. What we forgot to mention, that one of the best innovative ideas on Mariposa was when we discovered, you know, we can use the buildings to provide security as opposed to razor wire. And that's what we did, and Otay Mesa is a good example of that too. That's San Diego on the left, and Tijuana south of the border. And Otay Mesa is a much smaller town. I think it's 80,000 people. Of course, Tijuana is, you know, millions. And we won this job by ignoring what the GSA master plan showed us and reorganized the circulation. But what's important on this particular job is, unlike Mariposa, which was 5 miles outside of town, Otay Mesa is the southern edge of this little community. You can see it right there. And so there's that comes with additional responsibility. For decades, the land port of entry was it resembled more of a penitentiary than it did a gateway to the United States. So our first, most important design decision was take the new buildings that we were going to design and line them up along the southern edge there, creating
Just point out that what is new and what's existing.
Yeah, this is existing, and this is all new here, and it's new from here over. So that complicates the challenge even more. Rather than getting to completely rebuild the port, we now have to work within the constraints of existing facilities. But for us, just bring on the constraints. It makes us even better. So this was the before shot. Remember I said penitentiary? And I'm going to show you a rendering. This building is finally complete, but I don't have any new photography, so I'll show you the renderings. But that's the transformation. And rather than razor wire, we have, I like to think, beautiful buildings, lots of shade structures, protecting pedestrians from the heat. These are actual photos just before certificate of occupancy. But you can see that when I say the General Service Administration of the behemoth United States government is our best and most progressive client, I think you can believe me. All they want is us to do our best. They want us to bring design excellence to these land ports of entry, and they support us. And in the beginning, working, you know, you see, here's another contested landscape. You have GSA asking us to design, you know, sincere gestures of welcome to America. Then you've got Customs and Border Protection saying, screw that. We want to intimidate people and through visible law enforcement zone. So we had to somehow resolve those two things, which is why it's so much fun. So now we're going to go back to the San Luis. You know, we did the little pedestrian processing building back when the government didn't have as much money to work with. Because of Biden's infrastructure bill and Inflation Reduction Act, we're able to come back to San Luis and finish the job. And we took the lessons that we learned from our previous work to make a difference here. Just like Otay Mesa, San Luis, Arizona is a town of 8,000 people. And San Luis de Rio Colorado is 400,000 people. And this port sits on the southern edge of the little community of San Luis. So here again, we use the buildings as security devices, also reinforcing an urban edge so that this facility, this law enforcement facility, actually becomes a point of pride to the community. You can see how we're kind of circling the wagons with architecture. And so this will be the new gateway to the United States south of Yuma.
So this is the last project we're going to share. It's under construction right now. We're still finishing drawings. It's going to be going to open into 2028. It's like these projects just are tough to wrap your mind around how long they last and the phasing and all that thing. So there's lots of architecture, lots of interesting elements that we could talk about, but we could really spend a whole lecture doing it. So I'm going to focus on material that we're using a lot of that's a difficult conversation for all of us and challenging and figuring out how we move forward with the world of concrete. It's a material that I love. It's a material that the contractor that we are teamed with, our design build partner, are excellent craftsmen at, and they do it all day long and can make amazing products and walls and really whatever we want to do. So this is a shot from Mariposa. And so the other thing I want to make sure that I don't forget about is that on these projects, I mentioned bullet resistance. Anything that's facing south, based on the guidelines that we're given, have to be bullet resistant. So we have bullet resistant glazing, we have bullet resistant walls. But with concrete, we've developed with Hensel Phelps, our contractor, this strategy of doing a sandwich panel where you have a structural width, you have an insulation layer, and you have an architectural width. You have finished material outside that never needs to be maintained, beautiful finish. You have finished material inside that never needs to be painted, and you have a great thermal wall that's bullet resistant. So how do we solve the problem? The infrastructure, I'm not sure which one it is. It's either the Inflation Reduction Act or the Infrastructure Act is funneling more cash into our project so that we can study and try to solve this problem of low embodied carbon concrete. And we're working through it right now. We're getting more money so that we can basically sort of be this guinea pig and try to figure out some good ways of making this happen. The essential challenge is that, you know, we have two concrete plants in maybe 300 miles of San Luis. And if you start talking to the people that operate that plant about anything carbon, they look at you like you're blue. They have no idea what you're talking about and don't have any interest in talking about it. So what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of smart people that we work with out of a group called Brightworks, who are sustainability consultants, and we're taking them and we're going to educate these companies on how we can bridge this important topic and start doing really low carbon concrete. So, some of Hensel Phelps' handiwork from Mariposa. The other thing that we have at San Luis is an existing port with a crazy amount of existing concrete, pavement, and buildings. We saw that as an opportunity, proposed this idea to Hensel Phelps of taking it all, bringing a machine onto the site, pulverizing it, and reusing it. So there's lots of ways you can reuse it. We're pulverizing it into like inch and a half size pieces, and then also 3-inch size pieces. The 3-inch pieces are going to go into gabion walls. The small pieces are going to become finished material on tilt walls. I'm back to my lettuce. The other thing we're going to do is, as a finished material with the concrete, is we looked and studied a bunch of different options of how we could take lettuce leaves and make them imprints into the concrete. So we have aggregate finished concrete tilt panels, lettuce finished concrete tilt panels, and smooth concrete tilt panels. We had Hensel Phelps do some initial mock-ups of what that finish would look like from the pulverized concrete. I mean, what a better thing to do than to take the material that you're demoing on site and turn it into a finish of the new project. Alexis knows this image. We had a lot of people in the office study ways that we could come up with forms that were inspired from the lettuce and cast them into the concrete.
Yeah, this is after we tried putting lettuce outside in our parking lot and pouring concrete over it, didn't we?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that was another interchange of looking at you like you're blue. We talked to Hensel Phelps about basically getting trucks of lettuce and dumping them into the forms and pouring concrete over it. I still think that would be the best way to go, but we couldn't get them to dig into it. So we LiDAR scanned some lettuce leaves and ultimately created these 8 shapes that are going to manifest in the panels around the site. We had Hensel Phelps do some mock-ups. You can see on the left the aggregate base in the bottom of the form. On the right, the lettuce forms set on the casting bed. And then those panels, those mock-up panels, lifted and they're on site as we speak. The composition of how to distribute and how to sort of come up with a pattern of how the lettuce might show up on these walls went through many iterations. Ultimately, we sort of landed on 2 sort of modes of inspiration. One was sort of dropping lettuce and how it collects at the bottom, and then also that relationship to the human experience at pedestrian scale. I mean, that cast lettuce is really something that you want to touch. It's really sort of tactile. And so these lettuce shapes are going to sort of manifest at the bottom of the walls for the most part. And then there's a few walls on site that are mostly seen at a distance and went through a lot of iterations of this, but ultimately was inspired by some of Mame Kratz's work, if any of you know her work. These are poppy pods cut and cast into resin and then sanded smooth. She's an amazing artist. And so that image really inspired me to look at this arrangement of placing these lettuce leaves sort of as this jigsaw puzzle, really tightly spaced, something that you can see from a distance and it really would make you want to walk up and see it. So, overview of the project. and turn
Yeah.
it over to you to close.
So I want to give Alexis a bigger shout out than she's gotten. You know, we had a lot of failed experiments on that lettuce idea, and she, typical resourceful capitalist student, takes upon herself to go to the grocery store, the produce department, cull through the leaves, got the best leaves, brought them back to Joan's studio, set them on the light table, figured out how to photograph them so we could scan them and get the molds. So I love that story, and thank you for being there to save us. So, you know, this is an overview. You know, I can't say it enough. You know, it's okay to strive for excellence. Hence the name of our book. You know, you too can take inspiration in contested landscapes, in the contrast, in the discourse, and the competing and conflicting discourses. You know, that's where the solutions are. You know, I used to say that as architects, we get to live at the intersection of art and engineering. But I would also add to that we also get to live in that collision space between, you know, different opinions and different ideas and different cultures. And that in itself, you know, working within that space of contention and collision is very inspiring. And you too, you know, can thrive under those circumstances. So thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate it. And that was supposed to say all of that when this image was up. But this is the world we live in. Now you can get depressed about it or you can be inspired. We choose to be inspired. Thank you.